everybody. Welcome to Life in New York City and Japan. In this channel, we are going to talk about lifestyle and culture in both Japan and New York. My name is Manami. I'm from Tokyo, Japan, and I've lived in New York for 3 years. So now let me introduce my friend Andrew, who lived in Kyoto for a year. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Manami. So I'm originally from Houston, Texas. I'm 23 years old. I've been in New York for 5 years since I came here for college and grad school in 2015. I am here because I also like talking about life in Japan and New York. And I studied abroad in Kyoto for 1 year, Japanese language and culture.
Okay, so today this is our second episode, and we are going to talk about living abroad in Japan. Can you tell us a little bit more about your study? What did you study there?
When I was a junior in college, I studied for 1 year in Kyoto at the Kyoto University of Foreign Studies. While I was there, I studied Japanese language, Japanese history, and Japanese culture, as well as philosophy.
Okay, so what was your main focus?
My main focus was learning Japanese language.
How did you study Japanese language?
So we used a Mina no Nihongo textbook, and we also learned through movies, and we also wrote about different social issues in Japanese.
Yeah, it's kind of the same way we learn English here. We use textbook, we use movies, and we also learn a lot about social issues. And also, I remember when I was at language school, we used YouTube videos. Did you use YouTube videos to learn language?
No, not at school. I used it on my own.
Oh, okay. But you used the YouTube video to learn Japanese by yourself.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So why did you decide to come to Japan?
So I decided to go to Japan because I really like the literature. Kyoto is super famous for poetry around the world. I also really like matcha, so Uji City in Kyoto Prefecture was amazing. And it's also some place that you hear a lot about in America, but not too many people have the chance to actually go there. So I wanted the opportunity to visit it.
Okay, so what was your first impression or general impression of Japan?
My first impression of Japan was very positive. I think it's a very organized society. I think it's a very clean society. I think everything has a process to it. And seeing that really made me feel calm there. And I also feel like people are more able to be their natural self there. So, for instance, I really liked how people were more calm. I didn't see as much tenseness in the air in Japan. I liked how people read books and played games on the train and weren't bothering others. And the jazz music and everything playing everywhere just made everything seem like happier and more peaceful.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say Japan is cleaner than other countries, and I think so too, compared with New York. New York is pretty dirty city. There are a lot of trashes, a lot of roaches in the city. But well, I don't think all of the places in Japan are clean. I know there are a couple of places which are not so clean, but relatively Japanese places are cleaner than other places. So what do you think is the reason why Japanese people can keep place cleaner?
So I think one big reason for sure is social face and the importance of the concept of tatemae, I guess what we would call in English social airs. So one big difference I found between Japan and other countries is that Japan really cares a lot about the image that's conveyed. I also think it has to do with formality. They want to be as formal as they can. They want to be able to convey a sense of, harmony. I don't think other countries don't want to make everything feel peaceful and calm, but I think they don't care as much about that as they do like utility or business, like just making money or other factors that don't have to do with the way something looks.
Yes, I agree. I think a lot of Japanese people really care about what other people think about themselves. And I think people are trying to be polite or keep everything clean because I think one reason is people are afraid of being accused by other people.
Yes, I think the same way. Historically, what I've learned is that Japan is a small island, right? And before a certain point in time in modernity, Japan was mostly populated by Japanese people. Their native area were the people they were going to be with their whole lives. So if they caused any problem with someone in their area, that would be like that would be it. Like they wouldn't be able to do business. I think that's where it started. And over time, people have held on to that in the sense that, well, every person you have a bad interaction with could be connected to someone else and could lead to more bad interactions. So it's kind of like it's trying to stay safe and trying to minimize the amount of risk as much as possible.
Yes, minimizing risk is a really big thing for Japanese. I think so too. What do you think is the difference between just traveling to Japan and living in Japan?
The biggest difference between traveling to Japan and living in Japan is the difference between having fun on the surface and getting to know the place in depth. So basically, a lot of people here that love Japan but have never been to Japan think a lot about anime, think a lot about manga, and think a lot about popular culture, but they very rarely understand like the negative sides to Japan or sides that aren't as public. For example, one thing I was trying to do with both my theses was talk about the Japan that most people don't think about. So that's one thing that I noticed abroad is that a lot of people don't take Japan seriously. They see it more like, oh, Mario Party or Donkey Kong or like Nintendo or Pokemon, but they don't really see it as a country that is worth researching in depth sometimes. So I wanted to show that it is. And people don't know a lot about like the real social issues there, like the Zainichi issue or the Budakumin issue or the Hikikomori issue. And little by little, it finally gets to the world, but it takes so long for people to go like, oh wow, Japan does have issues. Like the only big issue that most people know about is like suicide, and that's it. So when people travel to Japan and they have fun at the temples and they have fun at the restaurants, like the robot restaurant, or like at a baseball game, it's great. You know, they see Japan as a fun place, but it's a little bit sad in the sense that they don't understand like bureaucracy and how you have to go to the city hall for a lot of things, or how you pay your bills at a convenience store and how everything has to follow a specified format. And I don't think it's about seeing Japan as negative and positive, but it's more about if you really love a place, you should strive to understand it deeply. You shouldn't just go, oh yeah, it's great, it's perfect. You know, like you should try to understand like why did they make anime? Like where did that come from? Or why are so many Japanese songs also very sad sometimes, you know?
Yeah, I agree. So I think living in a foreign country gives you an opportunity to, of course, understand that place more deeply. I live in New York right now, and I had a lot of, like great expectations for New York before I came here. But now I started to see more like a deeper aspects of New York City.
Well, for instance, like we talked about in our last episode, you wouldn't know that the New York subways are so problematic unless you lived here. I mean, you can hear about it on the news or you can go like, "Oh yeah, I heard that's crazy about New York." But until you actually are trying to get to work and the train is running late, you're like, "Oh my god, like this is New York." You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
you can't really experience that unless you live there, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like you can hear about like, oh yeah, things take a long time in Japan and you have to wait. But until you're like trying to get your health insurance and you have to go through all these steps, you're not really gonna realize how long it actually takes.
Yeah, yeah, true. So I think if I need to stay here for just a couple of days, and then if I take the subway, and then if I experience some problems, I can ignore it because I'm going to go back to Japan in a few days. But if I live here, if I'm going to stay here for years, then I have to deal with it. I have to live with it. So that's I think that's the biggest difference or a different thing about living in a place.
Yes, that's the biggest thing because, you know, people will always be like, "Oh, you went to Japan, like you must have loved it." Did you go to like, I don't know, Odaiba to see the Gundam statue? Or like, did you go to karaoke all the time? And it's just kind of like you hear that and you're like, "Yo, you is that all you think about Japan? Like, come on, like it's way more than that." And I mean, I think sometimes too, when I was a camp counselor, because over the past summer I was a camp counselor at Harvard for Japanese students from Tokyo. And it was my first time to Boston too. So I was kind of seeing Boston for the first time too. And it's just, they thought everything was amazing. Like, wow, America is great. And it's just, and I mean, I never told them, like, well, you don't know like how bad the other parts are, but it's just interesting sometimes when people come here and they notice, for a short period of time, all the good things we have. They don't realize like how hard it's actually to live like a daily life here.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, so when you were in Japan, did you miss the US?
I missed it a little bit. Specifically, I didn't have any big moment where I'm like, oh my God, if I could only go back home. I did not, yeah, I didn't think that. But I did miss the openness of America sometimes. So it is true. In Japan, there is a lot less diversity than there is in the States, especially in New York City. I mean, the way people use Instagram is differently. So before I went to Japan, I used to post all my poems. I used to like be very active in my writing on Instagram. But then when I got there, I noticed like people post like pictures with their friends and pictures of like flowers and like sunsets. And I'm just kind of like, oh, that's nice. But like, I felt weird posting what I posted. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm not going to post my poems anymore. So I did feel a little shocked, kind of like it's nice, but like there's no more of that openness that there was in the States. So that's one aspect I missed. But overall, I love being there more than here. Given that I did live in the center of Kyoto City, I didn't have to work in Japan. Like, I was able to just go to school and hang out with friends. So it was like a dream come true for me that time. And while I was there, sometimes I would visit, well, actually, a lot of times I would visit a cafe in Shijo Kawadamachi called Holly's Cafe, where they played a lot of like 1950s, 1960s music from America. And it was just so nice because I can't even find a cafe like that here in New York. And the food was so much better in Japan. So I think that's another thing that I miss about Japan now, but it's like Japan has some places like Mr. Donut and Lawson's to an extent where they serve American food, but it's like it's better than America serves it. Or it's like they make it look so much more fun and cool than it is here. So I didn't miss America too much. I just missed my family the most. So I would always contact them every day. And them knowing that I was happy there made them happy, and that made me happy.
Thankfully now, we have like a great technology. So we can do FaceTime, we can do calls. I do FaceTime with my family now, especially because of this lockdown. So my parents are really worried about me. So I always try to take a contact with them as often as possible. Even if you miss your country, there are a couple of ways to decrease your stress or anxiety about being in a different country.
I agree. Technology has helped a lot in terms of bridging the gap between your home and another country. Overall, I like life in Japan. I felt more comfortable there being kind of lonely sometimes because I feel that in Japan, they don't view being alone and going around alone the same way we view it here. Definitely to anyone from America or anywhere that wants to go to Japan, I would say it's a very good place if you kind of just want to be yourself and kind of do some research on your own, because over there they don't force you to be loud or force you to be quiet. Like if you want to go to an izakaya, you can go. If you want to go to a quiet cafe, you can go. And you can go alone. It's okay. You don't have to feel weird sitting somewhere by yourself. Whereas here in the States, it does sometimes feel like whenever someone sees someone by themselves, they're like, oh, that person's lonely, or that person's like feeling bad. It's like, no, I'm just doing my thing. And I guess that's one last thing that I did notice more in Japan is that there's a lot more girls that are willing to like go to places by themselves in Japan than in the States. And because at school I always learned about like feminism and gender rights, even though we always hear bad things about gender rights in Japan, I was really surprised to see the amount of like independent women there, like just being by themselves and doing things, like because I don't see that too often here in the States. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, but I think it's more like a recent thing, because
Yeah.
when I was in Japan, when I was a child, people think that being by themselves is sometimes like lonely. So it's changing. It's definitely changing, and and more people think, being by themselves is a rather good thing. The society itself is changing, so I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a double-edged kind of way because like circles are very important in school, and if you can't be in a circle, it feels very isolating. And of course, there's hikikomori who are too lonely. Of course, if you don't have a friend group, people do criticize that in Japan. However, it's not the same as here. In one sense, it's they like you better if you're part of a social group, but at the same time, no one bothers you for doing your own thing. Like if you want to be part of a social group, you can do that. If you don't, yeah, that's a little lonely, but you're figuring it out.
Okay, thank you for sharing your experience.
Thank you.
All right, so that's it for today. And our next episode is Opportunity in New York. Andrew and I are going to talk about job opportunity in New York. So we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.